how to dissolve limiting beliefs. And this isn't only in negative beliefs, by the way, because even positive beliefs can limit you. So we're going to be looking at both sides of things. And these beliefs can both be external or internal, meaning judgments you place upon others or judgment you place upon yourself. And you actually realize by the end of this video that there's no difference between the two. So we're going to start by looking at the different ways this can show up, and then we're going to address exactly how you can go about a step-by-step method of asking yourself specific questions to start to dissolve these beliefs using the Demartini method. So why do we need to address these beliefs? Whenever you're operating from these limiting beliefs, you are being driven by a stress response. Essentially, you're out of balance because when the amygdala is turned on, you're in this fight or flight state where you're looking to seek pleasure, avoid pain, seek prey, avoid predator. And in this state, the amygdala starts to exaggerate things because it's trying to push you towards survival. So nothing else matters in that moment. You don't need to be thinking clearly. It needs to exaggerate the threat to make sure that you capture prey or avoid predator in order to survive. But in our day-to-day world, that's not really efficient, because what happens is you become tunnel visioned on that one specific factor and you filter out everything else outside of that vision. So essentially your view of reality is distorted. And this is why whenever you're speaking to somebody who's highly emotional, a lot of the times they sound crazy because they're not thinking clearly. What they're saying doesn't make sense, and it seems like they're just focused on one thing and ignoring the other picture. But you, as someone that's objective, observing from the outside, can see what they're blind to. So the idea here is you want to recognize whenever you're feeling triggered or emotional, and that's either too positive or negative, right? When you have the strong valency assigned by the amygdala, this is when you want to go through this process to bring yourself back into balance, which is essentially neutralizing a heavy positive with a negative and vice versa. Because now you're more in the executive center, which is where you have more conscious decision making as opposed to automatic reaction, which is what the amygdala does. And now you are more objective and able to see the full picture clearly for what you want. And at this point, it becomes easier for you to recognize truly what's for you and what's not when you are in non-judgment, unconditional judgment. Okay, so the example we're going to go through, and by the way, the reason why this is so valuable is you'll slowly start to realize, if you go through any of these beliefs that you have in your life, once you go through this process, you start to realize that there's hidden order in the chaos, meaning every event is not negative or positive. They're just simply events, and every single one of them actually serves a specific purpose if you just take enough time to investigate it. Now, most people come to this realization with enough time, right? That's why they call it the wisdom of the ages. So many people, maybe yourself, if you actually were to look back at a very traumatic, negative, difficult time in your life, maybe now, years later, you can look back and realize why that was a good thing. And now you could actually feel grateful for it. And that emotion where you no longer have any attachment to the event and you actually, knowing what you know now, would actually choose it. That's what we're trying to achieve, but in the moment. Why have to wait for time to pass in order to get it when you can actually go through the same process and achieve that instantly? You don't need to grieve or suffer or have any trauma or struggle for years and years and years when you can utilize it within hours or days. And some people aren't even lucky enough to have time to do it for them. Some people just live from that narrative their entire lives. So for this example, we're going to look at when you are judging externally somebody else, but positively. So infatuation, right? When you have this fantasy about someone, you admire them, you're obsessed with them. Step one is always getting very clear on the trait, action, or inaction which that person is displaying that you admire most. Okay, we want to understand what is it, what's the perception, what's the trait, what's the judgment, the positive judgment in this case, that is applying that positive valency through your amygdala. So you want to go to a specific event and notice how this is very active, and it's going to be based on a lot of facts, not assumptions, because we want you to get to the point of dissolving the belief on your own. I'm not here to give you any magical answers. I'm here to guide you through a set of questions that's going to put you in your forebrain and have you actually investigate the situation to truly start to see it more objectively. So you want to go to a specific event or moment in time where you perceive that individual displaying or demonstrating that trait, action, or inaction. Okay, we want to get clear on what that thing is. That's step one. Step two then is you want to understand that the reason why you admire that person is because that same trait, action or inaction, that judgment which you perceive in them, is something that you're too humble to admit is within you. So going back to what I said was, there's no difference between external and internal judgment. The only reason why you have positive or negative judgment outwards towards other people is because that thing is within you but repressed. So you're either too humble to admit that what you see in them is within you, or you're too prideful to admit, again, that what you resent them for is also within you. So, step number two, you want to collapse that separation between the trait being outside of you and realizing it's within you. So now you want to go to a specific moment in time, an event, where you perceive yourself having displayed that same trait, action or inaction that you admire in someone else. Where were you the exact same? From there, we want to start to break down this fantasy of the positive trait, because everything has two sides. You just need to perceive the side that you're not seeing. So now you want to ask yourself, when I displayed that specific positive trait that I'm proud of myself for, right? I was too humble to admit, but this is something I admire. Maybe it was to somebody else. What were the downsides in that moment? Spend enough time, okay, and you will find negatives. There's always drawbacks that you just weren't aware of. You decided to filter out and only focus on the positives. This is where the issue is. This is where the infatuation comes from. So what were the downsides? And start to list them off, as many as you can find, until you start to feel like there's more of a balance and it's more two-sided as opposed to one-sided, your view at that point. Step number 4. Go back to the individual that you admire now and ask yourself, when they displayed that positive trait, judgment, what were the downsides to you at that point? Okay? And step number 5 now, ask yourself, that same individual which I admire, where are they the exact opposite of what I perceive them to be? Once again, everybody's two-sided. People are both nice and mean, loving, angry. We always display both sides, both aspects, because we're whole, we're complete. But what happens is sometimes we convince ourselves that somebody is one-sided and we expect them to live up to that fantasy. And when we're presented with the other side, that's when we get disappointed, because we're expecting a one-sided reality. So that same person that you admire, you want to look for their downsides, their flaws, their opposite, times where they're displaying opposite behavior. And you think long and hard enough about this, you will find times where they're not all you think they are. We want to start to dissolve the fantasy you have behind them, right? And now the last question that you can use. When that same person I admire is the opposite, what are the advantages at that point? So this is to show you that, number one, they're not this fantasy. And even if you thought they were, we broke down why that has downsides as well, right? So we're starting to level things out. And then, now that we've shown you that that person can also be the opposite, which is the thing that, in a way, you're avoiding, right? Because if you're seeking the fantasy, you're seeking that pleasure, that admiration, you're also avoiding the opposite side of it, right? By definition. So now, what if I showed you the opposite exists, which it does, right? That's what we found. What if now there were benefits to that thing that you were secretly avoiding, right? So what are the benefits to when that same person displays the opposite? Now, continue to go through these questions and list more and more examples up until you start to feel the charge start to dissipate slowly. And it might take a few times. You might have to really sit with the questions. But what's happening here is we're just slowly making sure things are balanced, that you're seeing the full picture. It's the same way when two people are trying to decide between, when you're trying to decide between two things. Commonly, what you do in your mind is you go through the pros and cons of each, right? That's natural. And that's what you do, because this is your intuition trying to keep you into balance. Make sure you're seeing both sides. And once you see the pros and cons here and the pros and cons here, now you can make a more informed decision, right? Because you're using the executive, the forebrain. That's what you're trying to do. And when this is on, you start to also use neurotransmitters to start to calm down the effects of the amygdala, the stress response, which is just trying to push you towards running towards something or running away from something, right? This is where you're not thinking clear, not seeing the full picture, because it's go time, it's survival. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. Okay, so once you've seen the pros and cons of everything, now you can make an informed decision, and you might choose this one or this one. That's fine, right? This is where your own values, who you are as a person, is going to differ. There is no right or wrong choice. Different people will choose different things based on their value system. But the key thing is we're trying to get you to the point where you can make your own informed, objective decision. Okay, now you can obviously take these same questions and modify them if you're dealing with an internal judgment, and if you're dealing with also a negative judgment. It's the same process. But hopefully now you start to understand that when you go through this, you can finally start to move more into conscious decision making and no longer automatic reaction, which is that animalistic side of you. And from there, what you start to notice is, because what we're doing here is when you come into balance, into harmony, this is also how you regulate your entire system, your nervous system. And this is what love is. It's integration of both sides. It's acceptance. And acceptance doesn't work if there's some kind of conditional judgment on one side. If you're denying one side, that's not acceptance. And true love is unconditional. It's wholeness. It's integration of both sides. This is the only way for you to end suffering. It's not when you chase happiness or anything else, right? Because chasing happiness implies you're also denying or running away from any sadness, and that's inevitable. So whenever you try to avoid the unavoidable, that's what causes suffering, right? You're denying one half of reality. So instead, what we want to do is accept things the way they are, and from there, based on seeing the full picture, decide what it is that makes sense to us based on our own values. And this is how you end up pursuing more of what's meant for you. This is how you end up figuring out what your purpose is, right? But before you can start to listen to your own intuition, you need to make sure that it's not being distorted by these limiting beliefs. And obviously this is an ongoing process, right? Because every single time you come across new events, new circumstances, you might have new limiting beliefs, right? You might have new fantasies that start to develop, or new things you resent, new triggers. And you can use these questions again and again, right? To keep bringing yourself back into balance. And the more you do this, the more you start to discover who you are, learn more about yourself. But the goal is to try and always move back into authenticity when you feel yourself being pulled out of balance. And you also notice this is going to translate to better health in your body, because all issues in the body eventually stem to some kind of imbalance. So try these questions, and if they helped you, please let me know how they've changed your perspective on things. And if you're enjoying these kind of videos, any more topics you want me to cover, please let me know.